What happens when a career in law enforcement becomes the inspiration for telling stories about crime, people, and the communities behind the headlines? Our guest today, Rodney Carpentier, is an 18-year law enforcement professional and author of small town mystery and crime procedural fiction. His debut novel, Our Lady of the Overlook, is the first book in a planned trilogy and draws heavily from his experiences observing people, investigating human behavior, and working in the real world of law enforcement. Our guest today brings an unusual authenticity to his fiction because his characters are inspired by real people and his settings come from places he knows intimately. Much of his work is set in the small communities of New York's Catskill Mountains, an area he and his wife have explored extensively. Beyond writing, our guest today is an accomplished hiker who has completed the Catskill 3500s and, and traversed the 24-mile escarpment, and traversed the 24-mile escarpment trail in a single day. Today, we will explore how law enforcement shapes storytelling, why small town communities make such compelling settings for crime fiction, and how real people and real places become the foundation for fictional stories. Rodney, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Darlington.
All right, so Rodney, take us back to the beginning. What first inspired you to turn your law enforcement experience into a fiction?
So, as far back as I can remember, I always wanted to write, and I was always telling stories when I was younger. However, I just never had an opportunity to kind of go in that direction. So, life happens. I went to college, graduated from college. I got married. I moved around a little bit, and I ended up in law enforcement as a career. And at that point, I was just going through my career, and it was about 4 years ago when an idea just kind of popped into my head. And for the first time, I really had something to say and something to really draw from. Back when I first started writing, I only, I had so little life experience to kind of, to pull and to grab all these things from. And once this idea came, I had, at that point, not quite 18 years of law enforcement background, but enough to pull that in and to begin to tell this story.
Okay, Rodney, so you have said that your characters come from real life. What have you learned about people through 18 years in law enforcement that has influenced the way you create your characters?
So a lot of that influence is when I'm drawing some of these law enforcement characters. So I have met, thousands of cops probably at this point between the different agencies and traveling and going to conferences and all these different things. And while there's a through line of who someone who goes into law enforcement and the personality and things that they have a lot of differences in their idiosyncrasies and their personal lives. And just like anyone else you meet on the street, there's a battle, there's thoughts that are going through their head that you have no idea. And I just really try to bring that out when I'm developing some of these characters. And kind of what I did was so that, I'm not, trying to offend anybody by creating these characters, but I'll take different parts of people I've worked with, people I've known for years and years and years, and I'll kind of, mix and match some of their things and kind of create this whole new person, but has these very, very specific things that I've experienced and I can kind of speak to and have a reaction to, and I can kind of put myself, in their shoes or behind their eyes a little bit and have that more personal touch. to the characters that I'm putting in these situations.
Okay, so how do you transform real experiences and observations into fictional stories without simply recreating real ones?
So, the trilogy, as you mentioned in the intro, it's called the Overlook trilogy. The first two books are out. Our Lady of the Overlook is the first one. Quiet Whispers of the Overlook is the second one. They are completely fictional. I've never investigated a murder. It's not the kind of law enforcement work that I've done. I was an investigator for a number of years. I've been a sergeant for almost a decade, and over the last year, I've actually moved up to being a lieutenant. So I have patrol experience, investigative, supervisory, kind of that little bit of a higher level, and I try to take those those experiences and where those are, and apply those those different levels to this made up world and this made up story that I've kind of come up with, and I try to again put that spin of these different perspectives now on this fictional story. And what I'll do is instead of taking, a real life crime and kind of doing a, regurgitation of it, what I'll do is I'll take the small parts. That's the procedural part of my, my writing is I can, I've made, hundreds of vehicle stops in my day. I've, done dozens and dozens of interviews. I know how those situations are. And instead of trying to, create those feelings, I'm trying to express them in a way that I can make it more relatable to the people that are reading and kind of, again, put themselves in that situation.
Wonderful. Someone would have thought you have maybe investigated uh, a case like that by the way you write. So I'm
Thank you.
wondering how are you able to write so well when because I tried writing fiction and I think fiction is not for me.
So one of the biggest things I can say is I was always a voracious reader. Growing up, I was reading Sherlock Holmes books when I was 5 years old. I still remember I went to the book fair in my school when I was in first grade, and I picked up. It was a book the size of a brick, and it was a complete works of Sherlock Holmes. And I was like, I want to get this book. And the teacher, she was kind of looking at the size of it, kind of looking at the size of me at the time. And I was like, are you sure you want to get this? And I said, absolutely. No, yeah, I want to get this. So she opened it up and she said, okay, just read a little bit out loud to me. So I picked it up and I was reading. I probably read a page and a half, and she goes, all right, do you understand this? And I said, yeah, Sherlock Holmes is asking about this. And I kind of kind of played back for her what I read. And she goes, okay, no more questions. You can get this book. I'm like, thank you. So I still have that book on my bookshelf behind me, actually. So I was always a reader, and I kind of, followed that along. And then when I went to college, I went and started an English major, and I was studying literature. And again, you get into more and more reading, and I had very high, lofty goals for myself. Like I said, I've been writing this entire time too, and kind of creating these stories. But once I got into college and I thought I knew better, and I'm reading these classic novels or these well-known historical, stories and novels and books and plays, I began to think, I'm going to write like this. I'm going to be Ernest Hemingway. I'm going to be William Faulkner. And I studied how they wrote, and I tried to kind of emulate them. But again, I didn't have that life experience to kind of pull from in order to put some reality behind it. Everything was very theoretical, and I was trying to, again, emulate these other writers. And I was always very good at writing, and I could kind of put things out a lot better than other folks. And again, once I kind of had something to say, and I had something to really fill up the story and these ideas, I'm not going to lie, I went on and I started listening to podcasts, and I watched a lot of YouTube videos about craft. I started going to conferences and really kind of saying, how do I make myself sound like these people that I've been reading and listening to? And, it's really, simple. It's not easy, but it's simple. And once you kind of follow, there's a little bit of a formula to it, but it's one of those things where once you learn the rules and learn how to do the things, then you can start bending them and shaping them into your own specific art and kind of creating your own voice in that way.
Okay, so Rodney, what is your writing process like?
So it's changed a lot since I've kind of, hung my shingle out as a writer and an independent novelist. So the first book, again, in the trilogy, Our Lady of the Overlook, the idea came to me while I was at work one night. And the idea was, I'd been listening to a ton of true crime podcasts at the time. So I kind of had this true crime like voice in my head. And the idea was, what if person had grown up in an adoptive family, knowing you were adopted, you grew up, you're an adult now, and as an adult, you decided, hey, I want to try to figure out who my biological family are. I want to, try to see if I can meet my parents and all these other things. And when you did that DNA test, instead of, getting this scary news that, your great uncle was the Golden State Killer or you're related to some horrible person, you get this tragic news that your mother was the unidentified victim of a cold case homicide. So nobody knows who she is. Nobody knows who killed her. And, what would that do to you? So that was kind of the impetus in this flash idea that came through my head. And once I started to, I kind of committed myself to writing that story. Like you said, I needed to figure out. So I had to kind of invent my process, and I did all the things. I went in the podcast, YouTube videos. I grabbed books that I had never read in college about the hero's journey, and Robert McKee's book on story, and Sid Field on screenwriting, and just trying to develop how I'm going to do this story. And I was kind of all over the place. And then I listened to a podcast that explained the save the cat method of plotting, and everything unlocked for me. And obviously I'm not going to get into the whole save the cat method, but it's very cinematic. It actually starts with the original idea came from writing screenplays. So it was telling a story like you're watching a movie. And that clicked a lot better for me than trying to do a lot of these other plotting structures. So what I did was I actually plotted out the different scenes in the first book to kind of try to match and follow this method. And it worked for the most part. And it was really about kind of connecting the threads and making sure that one led into the other. But I just had these different scenes and knowing what the goal was for that part of the Save the Cat. So I plotted out that entire book, knew where I was going the entire time. I had created summaries of the different scenes and how they were going to connect. So that was book one. Book two, when I started that, I had no idea where I was going with it. And I kind of had my blank chart and my outline chart that I had used, I kind of copied and pasted into a new Excel spreadsheet. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, all right, you finished one book, and I had no idea where I wanted to go with the next. So while I kind of plotted my first book, the second book, I really was a lot more seat of the pants. And I kind of had to try to warm up a little bit and get myself re-immersed back in the world to figure out, all right, the end of the first book, there's an arrest, and there's, a lot of clarity that comes out of it. And now I need to kind of turn it upside down. How am I going to do that? And I kind of had to explore that a little bit. But then as I warmed up, I started looking at the Save the Cat method, and there are major road signs, like your inciting incident or your catalyst, that really gets the story going. I came up with an idea for that scene. I came up with an idea for the midpoint, which is kind of, where your story turns again and kind of throws your main character in a different direction, and leading up to the darkest moment, kind of where are we going to bottom out in this story before our main character starts coming back, and then obviously having a climax to the story. So I kind of hit those major milestones, those major mileposts within the story, and then I started the scenes that kind of surrounded them. I started kind of pushing the characters that direction a little bit here and there, kind of like, hey, I know where I need to go. You're on you're on a boat, and you need to be, over here to the left. You don't, just turn, shift the steering wheel. You kind of got to guide it, nice and easy into where you got to go. And that's what I started doing with the second book. So now where I'm at with book number 3, I'm in the revision process. I again kind of warmed up. I had to warm back up into the process, and I didn't know where I was going. But I kind of followed the same thing as book 2, where I looked at the major milestones. I said, all right, I'm trying to wrap up, three books worth of stories. Where are my major milestones, and how do I push them there? So right now in the revision period, I'm kind of going through now and making sure that they all tie together. So my process is really plotting and having a plan, but also kind of having this free write, this pantsing a little bit to say, I'm gonna throw some characters into a situation, and with, this is the setting, and this is the place where the scene's going to take place, and kind of let it naturally kind of flow out a little bit and say, this guy's angry. What's this person's reaction going to be, and where does that bring us next? And just kind of, let it flow out a little bit and not have so much control.
All right, Rodney, thank you. So, what can readers expect from the rest of the trilogy following Our Lady of the Overlook?
So, like I said, book 2, Quiet Whispers of the Overlook, came out just under a year ago. It'll be a year on August 29th. So that takes our characters, like I said, it kind of turns everything upside down. Everything you thought you knew and thought understood from the first book kind of gets turned on its head, and it really leaves the reader with this Empire Strikes Back kind of feeling, where there's a big secret that comes out at the end of it, and you don't know where we're going to go next. And where I'm at with book number 3, which I plan on titling Most Precious Blood of the Overlook, is really kind of continuing that story and just pushing it out a couple of weeks to say, all right, we kind of had, the dust settled a little bit, but now we're, things are going to keep going. And I'm really looking forward to wrapping up, the 2 major mysteries that are at the core of the story. by the end. And, I've known for a long time who did it and why they did it. And I've been just kind of throwing a lot of the red herrings and misdirections out there a little bit. But again, I'm really hoping that people are very satisfied when they get to the end of book 3, which, again, revision mode right now as of August of 2026. So I'm probably looking to release that early in 2027.
Okay, thank you so much, Rodney. Finally, for someone who has never read small town crime fiction, what do you hope they discover when they enter the world you have created?
So in your intro, you mentioned that I spent a lot of time hiking the Catskill Mountains of New York, and that's kind of become my setting. It's very different than where I live and work presently. I live about 30 miles north of New York City right now. I work in a very similar area. The mountains in this small town, you have this close knit and this tightness and this familiarity between all the people there. And when you're looking out for your neighbor, sometimes you also end up with some secrets, and you end up maybe holding on to information that could help in the end. And that's kind of what we get with this small town mystery. And what I've always really liked about that, when it comes to reading, you can read some of these big city mysteries, taking place in LA or New York City or, any other major, metropolitan city. I like the ones that are kind of set in these smaller and very intimate communities where, the people's connections, overlap so much that there's a dependency that you're not always necessarily, all you're getting is the surface of what's going on. You don't have the context, everything behind them. And that's what you kind of have to, dig through. That's kind of the archaeology of a small town mystery. Is you may have, this crime or this location that's at the surface, but you need to kind of dig between the different things in order to discover a lot more of the context of what's going on.
Okay, thank you so much, Rodney. Thank you for joining us and giving us a look behind the scenes of your writing, your law enforcement career, and the communities that inspire your stories. What makes your work particularly interesting is the way real-world experience, human behavior, and a deep connection to place come together to create fiction that feels authentic. So, for those who would like to get your book and check out your work, how can they do that?
So you can go to my website, www.rlcarpentierwriter.com. You can go there, in the process of revamping that. So there's a lot of new, interesting material there. You can buy a book directly from me, from my store. Additionally, you can also sign up for my newsletter, which I am releasing monthly at this point, with all the news and all the things coming out. And in addition, I'm also on Amazon. I have a audiobook of both books, and I'm also available on Kindle Unlimited at this time.
All right, thank you so much. And to my audience, thank you all for taking your time to be here. It's been a pleasure having you guys on the show, and I will see you guys on the next episode. I love you guys so much. Thank you, Rodney. It was a pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Have a wonderful day.